Thank you very much. Well, let me start out with providing some background of the comprehensive cancer centers, which we think are a critical component of what we want to achieve in Europe. So let me start out with a simplified version of what is my take of the activities of the EU in order to improve the situation for cancer patients. And so we have a mission on cancer, which is largely focusing on understanding cancer and performing research. And we have the European Beating Cancer Plan that really wants to see implementation of this. And with the final idea that patients should live longer and have a better life and equal access to cancer care. And so there are a lot of initiatives there within in the cancer plan that should realize that. And there are many of them, such reducing tobacco usage, vaccination, lifestyle, but also establishing platforms and registries that will allow to perform research better. Now, as I said, the specific cancer infrastructures are important in our view. And so these are infrastructures of several kinds. First of all, what is needed is the infrastructures for basic and translational research. So to uncover new biology and to explore potential benefits for patients. And so this is typically well based in comprehensive cancer centers. Similarly, one needs good infrastructure for clinical trials to conduct innovative, data-rich studies, preferentially PI-initiated. Obviously, that's also an activity that you can most effectively do in comprehensive cancer centers, but that has not to be exclusive. That can also be in other areas. So you don't need necessarily always the complete infrastructure of a comprehensive cancer center for that. And then in addition, what we believe, certain from the side of the EACS, is that infrastructures for outcomes research is extremely important to assess effectiveness of what we might put in place. Because whatever we could consider as a successful clinical trial, 2 or 3, you still have to see whether that is really an improvement once you roll it out much wider in the in society. And that should also give us a better view on the quality of life, and it should obviously be integrated also with health economics in order to make sure that we do something that is affordable. And on top of that, one needs overarching support platforms and the biobanks, the omics, and data sets, which are increasingly shared by internationally also. And all of this has to be secured in infrastructures that have sustainability. And I think this is one of the critical aspects of this initiative, because, just the temporary support of establishing these activities, knowing that in 4 years or 5 years, there will be no support for it, that is not the right incentive to start it, because we know that it takes a while before this becomes effective and starts running. So this long-term sustainability, I think, of infrastructures is really a problem, which is a much more general problem in, I think, funding in the EU, because many of the programs that we have also had in the past were good initiatives, but they fell short because after 4 or 5 years, it disappeared. And there has to be a mechanism in order to improve that situation. And obviously, all countries should be involved. Now, the Comprehensive Cancer Center as a system, so the idea would be to have an EU-wide distribution, as you also heard earlier on from Simon, that executes innovative research and translational research and conducts proof of concept trials. Ideally, you have a lot of expertise in such centers. And I'm not going to read it all, but you can imagine not all centers will have all that sort of activities. Nevertheless, if we look at how research, clinical research and translational research is being conducted, then you see that more and more, you almost need all of them if you want to create a real comprehensive understanding of a particular feature in a clinic. And so, nevertheless, what I think is important in Comprehensive Cancer Center, that there is some type of high-quality research there, because that keeps clinicians and interactions sharp and makes sure that there is critical thinking in how clinical trials and other activities are executed. These centers should not stand on their own, because if they collaborate, as we heard in a number of talks earlier on, that can add a substantial added value to the, not only to the output and the quality of the work that's being done. So what we would consider is that you have comprehensive cancer centers that have varying level of expertise with respect to research activities, that might have variable emphasis on particular areas in the cancer research continuum, and in that way, together, support the research, but also provide a service to the community. And here, in these two bars, we sort of provide the accreditation requirements of the OECI, and the EACS has, at some point, the designation of excellence for some of the top centers that might have particular unique capabilities of doing high-quality research, and they might cover different areas in the cancer research continuum. So how would that then finally work together? And so the idea would be that then at the end, what you would see these comprehensive cancer centers that form an interaction, and together would then also provide platforms in which specific expertise is being put, and that they can share in the execution of their tasks. And obviously, each of them might have specific interactions with outside partners and so on. And this would give a critical mass that would allow a much more and effective recruitment of patients. And you could imagine that not all centers have to participate, but maybe some of them, 3 or 4, can do breast cancer trial, and others can do something else, but at least they have then a coherent sort of arrangement among each other so that they can proceed rather quickly in those trials. And so you can add to that, for example, also infrastructures for clinical trials. And some of those might be part of that, these comprehensive cancer centers, but there will be other centers that could participate in that, and so add to the number of patients that can be quickly recruited. And one can, in fact, go on and add additional components. So as center or aggregates to conduct prevention research, again, they might overlap with the same other centers that we just mentioned. So that's, nothing is necessarily mutually exclusive here. And next to the prevention research, you might similarly think that you can also add outcomes research, so that you really register what is, how effective particular interventions are for patients. And this whole agglomerate of centers, they also should of course, fulfill function outside. If you think they are ideally situated for outreach, let's say in regions with unmet need of underdeveloped areas, so that you achieve a type of twinning where interactions help to build infrastructures and networks in those underprivileged areas. Now, just to give you an example of the beginning of such a construction, and I think a good example for that is the Cancer Core Europe. And Cancer Core Europe is a CCC network in Europe, and you see some of the advantages that are associated with that. The high volume of clinical activities. So suddenly you have a tremendous number of patients that are visiting those centers or are treated by those centers, and together they have highly developed research infrastructures in the areas that we just discussed. And so the advantage of that is here, first of all, you have an optimized recruitment capacity through joint clinical trials operations, a flexible trial design adapted to the pharmaceutical companies' need, idea of a one-stop shop, which is of course very attractive both for the pharma as well as for such a center aggregate. Critical mass to study cell-agent cancer types. If they are rare, it's almost impossible to do that well unless you have very large groups of patients, and that's the case here. And then virtual data centers to have high-quality data records of high quality to use for outcomes research, and standardized regulatory procedures that is then centralized and dedicated to a CCE, in this case, task force. And importantly, education and training is, of course, can be well secured in such an interaction. And this all boosts quality. So how to build these infrastructures and networks off? So what we should do is incentivize cancer centers to acquire critical mass and commit to quality. And I think the OCI accreditation is a wonderful example of that, as you heard earlier. We should give specific assistance to centers in areas with unmet need, and encourage participation of other stakeholders, industry, hospitals, patient organizations. Everybody should chip in. And involve societies and associations of experts, patients, and charities. Charities provide an enormous fraction of the funding in Europe and elsewhere, so having them on board is extremely important. And I mentioned to you already the advantages of twinning as a way to help develop centers in the underprivileged areas. And they might not be able to start as centers. They might be just treatment areas that you try to build up and bring as soon as possible patients that are being recruited there also as part of the larger centers that are feeding these initiatives. And in fact, I think the EU mission on cancer is uniquely positioned to facilitate this process. And I mean, I would love to see that they are more proactive in doing that rather than sort of saying, well, the national governments have to do this. It's not going to happen with national government, but cancer centers can do it. If they interact, if you facilitate that, then you will create these potential interactions across countries and within countries. So that's actually what I wanted to say, and as an introduction to provide to you how we believe that the system could work, but it requires support. That should be absolutely clear, and in the discussion we can expand on that. Okay, well, thank you very much.